Well, welcome to the Structural Modeling video conference for March 7th, 2020. Topic for today's discussion is Metasystems Methodology by Arther D. Hall III. It was published by Paragon Press, I believe, in 1989. Very interesting book that provides a detailed and in-depth discussion of what's called a systems methodology, makes distinctions between systems science, systems engineering, operations research, and this concept of a systems methodology, what it is, why it's useful. I think the concepts and the ideas associated with systems or metasystems methodology are important to be able to outline and get the start making distinctions about the applications of certain processes, procedures, and methods. And it allows us to start creating some general concepts that we can use for categories. And then when we find that we're discussing certain types of systems patterns or certain types of analytical techniques that we can apply everywhere, then that gives you another indication that these techniques may be much more fundamental and basic to all types of systems approaches, but this Metasystems methodology will give us a framework upon which we can analyze and look at these things. So, an overview of systems methodology essentially is just put forward as a problem-solving approach and a structured way of solving very large-scale problems. And so this is in the beginning of the book, in the overview of systems methodology, the basic techniques of problem solving, creating value, adding value, working with large-scale teams, and generally solving problems. It is looked at from a historical perspective and also from, an idea of certain individuals that were able to put forward and use these types of techniques effectively. And in the early history of systems methodology, Hall gives an example from 4,000 years ago where a king is talking about what they do, the steps in building something. It says, when we mean to build, we first survey the plot, then we draw the model. Then we see the figure of the house. Then we must rate the cost of the erection, which if we find outweighs ability, what we do then but draw anew the model. Maybe include fewer offices, or at least desist to build at all. So basically, it's a planning process. This is our objective, we're going to build something. First we measure, then we kind of build a model, we estimate, we figure out if we can do it. And again, that was an example from a king in Mesopotamia at about 4,000 years ago. Then he goes through and talks about work that was done in the United States, talks a little bit about Thomas Edison, Thomas Jefferson, the Radio Corporation of America, but he gives these examples of people who have effectively used the systems methodology. He starts talking about the management science and operations research, how that fits in with systems methodology. And this is a very good review and summary of these types of techniques that were used, operations research, systems engineering, how they were used in the military and the government, and how they were applied. Also, the idea of academic contributions, where the classical Aristotelian logic was employed, and then further, when more developed inductive logic later on was developed, how that was used and how it is used within the systems methodology. So these are all things that basically provide a little bit of an idea about the what systems methodology is, but it's generally a well-defined, well-organized, large-scale problem-solving process. And so Hall provides a definition of the systems methodology, which systems methodology is an efficient, multi-phase, multi-level, multi-paradigmatic, creative process for finding, defining, and solving complex problems by using well-defined teams. It satisfies needs and seeks logical, factual, and value truth by matching a wanted system and its parts to its full environment as forecast over its entire life cycle. Applications of the systems methodology are found in the scientific method, action science, policy research, systems engineering, operations research, management science, cybernetics, environmental impact analysis, law, accounting, and history, and the applied sciences in general. So I think there's some really key aspects to the systems methodology definition. And one is that basically the instrument that's used to solve these problems and define these problems or discover these problems is a well-defined team. We're not talking about individual activities of a single individual here. We're talking about how does a well-defined team work together. So up to this point, are there any questions, any comments? Okay.
Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, I think that in order to be thorough and systematic, I would prefer to say that it does apply to the actions of individuals, but in a very degenerate way, or a very simple way, or a reduced way. I wonder if you think is there something fundamentally different in this problem solving by teams as opposed to by individuals? Or is it just that the individual is a very, a reduced case of the general model?
Well, that's an excellent question, Janet. I even have a chart to support the answer. So let me share the chart. Okay, hopefully you can see that, the general problem-solving process. And it's basically what we have is the problem space and the solution space. We start at the top here with a very well-defined problem and a closed solution. So these are canonical types of problems that people in engineering would have well-defined static problems. People in business or people in medicine have very well-defined, very well understood problems that have very well-defined solutions. And those are what people study as individuals, coming up through the disciplines and in their understanding. And so these are basically rated as simple problems. The complexity is simple because it's well-defined and closed. So what we have is an individual predominantly maintains a consistent view of the context as to what the well-defined problem is. They do that, they assign that themselves within their own context and their own understanding. Similarly, with ill-defined problems, the people in disciplines are taught how to take an ill-defined problem, apply a selected type of models that are understood to make it well-defined, and then they have a closed type of solution again. This continues to where you can have, ill-defined problem space, which is transferred to a well-defined, and an open solution space, which is then transferred to a closed solution space. For an individual, those are fairly simple because the value systems and the motivation for the modeling are within the control of that individual, right? But if you're going to do these activities within a group, the group must establish a base uniform context among its participants, which adds significantly to the complexity of the process. So does that make sense, Janet?
Yes, that's very helpful. What are the horizontal bars in some of the boxes there?
The horizontal bars. So those are just the dotted lines, you mean?
I don't know. In the third row there, you start with the boxes under well-defined and closed are broken up.
Oh, those basically just mean that you see in the closed, you have a green box that has no bars in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when we go to a closed solution here, where it's actually open, we model it and make it closed, so you can have more than one closed solution. You could have multiple closed solutions, and in the well-defined, then the problem goes from, oh, okay, well, this is not actually just one well-defined problem. Now we're looking at this as three well-defined problems.
Mm-hmm.
We're aggregating them.
Okay, so that could be brought out more in the chart. But I think you could also say that for individuals, great, the individuals, yeah, there you go. The individuals are not necessarily simple. They don't necessarily maintain one set of criteria. So then the individual would shade into the character of the group. If each time they think about a problem, they have different evaluation criteria, and also they might forget what they thought about it earlier, and then even though it's one individual, they're becoming more like a team because they have to remind themselves and reorient themselves. I guess in the simplest group case, where everybody knows how to use the same algorithm on an academic problem, and there are no, there's effectively no individual variation in the members of the group, then they would shade toward the individual. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's many different variations on this, but what we're trying to do with this graphic and with this kind of introduction and kind of walk through with the systems methodology is to emphasize the morphological framework that was presented by Hall about what are the different aspects of the structure and how are those independent aspects can be impacted by individual members of the team or the whole team. So that's
yes.
exactly where, I think that's exactly where we're going.
Right.
And the documentation and the communication of these ideas and concepts, for them to be consistent or if they're not consistent when they change, basically to have that recorded is very important.
Right. And yes, I think that is excellent in Hall's and Warfield's work. The emphasis on how much needs to be done in the mechanics of thinking things through and modeling, and that really comes out well. All I was saying was that I don't think it's simply a matter of how many people there are, one versus many, because it's really how many perspectives there are. Because if you're trying to decide whether to go to a conference right now, you can, put on various different hats, and you can think about it from a health perspective, from a financial perspective, from a career perspective, and that to some extent puts you in the same need for modeling support to handle the complexity that a group would have. Anyway, very good. I think it's just I think it's a subtle point I think the basic point is not really well understood in systems engineering and system science, and that's the most important thing to get across what you were just showing there. The subtle point would stop people from thinking, individuals are simple because they always have the same values, but when that's not true. You have multiple dimensions of complexity, even when you're just one person trying to make a difficult decision. Anyway, so carry on.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying. So the complexity range here, we really don't have a very fine-grained range. We just have complex, very complex and simple, but it's just to start conveying the idea that there is a range there, and there is a graded range. And then what we want to do is then start assigning attributes and attributes of certain activities to this range, and then assign those across and start mapping those a little better. So that definitely can be improved. There's no doubt about that. But so anyway, so basically, then Hall goes on to define systems methodology as a collection of 4 sets. And this is basically start talking a little bit more about the structure and morphology. And it's a set of activities. Then it's a set of tools or techniques. Then a set of people. And then a set of relations among the activities. So this really maps fairly well to what we think about when we're doing like large-scale systems engineering projects, where we're designing large-scale systems. It also maps very well to like large-scale project management, Gantt charts, PERT charts, things like that. But he takes and refers to the morphology of systems, the systems methodology. And what he does is he prevents a morphological analysis of the activities, and he breaks these into at least 4 fundamental dimensions. So now we're starting to do a dimensional breakdown of the systems methodology and what its component, so we can get a little bit better idea of what its structure looks like. And when we have that structure, it helps us again to create a more robust type of framework that allows us to identify the attributes that are assigned to these specific concepts that define the systems methodology. So there's the time dimension, or the time scale, which is just a sequence of activities from the creation to the basically decommission and disposal of any system. when we're talking about this, though, in those terms, we're talking about, designing, building, and deploying a system. Also, this time dimension could apply to people that are, or activities that are discovering a system, would be just a little bit different and not quite as deterministic, because it's discovering a system is always problematic, and it has statistical, stochastic aspects to it. You may never discover it, but you're trying to discover it. And then another dimension is the logical dimension, which defines the generalized human group problem-solving procedure and the elements of logic that may be performed as the tasks go by or as any specific logical block. So this is very interesting because there's different types of logic and different, which Hall develops later on in the book, but basically there are different types of truth. There's formal truth, and there's factual truth, and then there's value truth. And these are the types of things that are really important, especially in the logic dimension of systems methodology, because you really, they're more interested in value truth. You're concerned about factual truth and formal truth, but you want to be able to make sure that you're meeting the value of the system design. Then the third dimension is the basically the knowledge or content dimension, and these are is basically the bodies of facts, models, knowledge that's necessary to bring together to make the system successful. And then, of course, the fourth dimension is cultural, political behavior, or the human dimension. And so this is the aspect that says, well, the designers and users of the system, they have definite impact on the design and operation, and you need to be able to take their preferences, attitudes, management styles, languages, choices of data, models used, and all other factors into consideration when you're actually developing and deploying a system. And this morphology of the systems methodology seems to be weighted toward the design activity, where we're actually designing a system. So are there any comments up to this point? Okay. Well, then we'll go on and talk a little bit more about the 7 phases of life cycle, the systems methodology. So now, basically, we're talking about a life cycle of a system, whether we're designing a system or we're discovering it. We're now starting to lay out and talk about very specific steps. And that's program planning is the first step in the first phase in the life cycle. And then project planning. So there's a difference there between actually putting together the program, which is more funding and political and type of organizational approach. And then project planning, basically now you are focusing on creating and managing the individual components in the program. The system development. So you're going to now design the system in detail, and you've already decided that what the system has to do, what its requirements are. Now you start designing it. Then you produce the system, that's step 4. You distribute, deploy, or in-phase deliver the product. Step 1, 2, that's step 5. Then, of course, the operations phase, or step 6. And then finally, the disposal or retirement phase. So this is a general systems engineering type of life cycle approach. There's many of these depending upon, whether you're doing Department of Energy program or Department of Defense or a commercial program, but they're all logically rather the same. And they basically are the steps that need to be managed and curated well to have a successful program. And then, of course, Hall goes on to talk about the elements in the logic of systems methodology. And so what types of logical or background information do you really need to have a successful program or project? So the first thing that in the elements of logic of systems methodology is you really need to have a very good problem definition. And so if you're going to design a system to solve a problem, you really need to know what the problem is. So it needs to be very well defined. The second part of the elements of logic is a value system design. And so you're going to have trade-offs, you're going to have different alternatives. And so you need within this process to design and document your value system so that you know that you're making consistent type of decisions based on that value system. And then there's system synthesis, where you're basically collecting or searching for all the alternatives and options, everything that you can find out that might be useful in solving the problem. And you're basically collecting those and making a decision relative to the merits of what can, of your value system, of the types of ideas and alternatives that you found. And then there's systems analysis, which means you go through and look at all of the information you have and start deducing a set of consequences and that are basically relevant to the value system. And you want to basically create, and through analysis, a system configuration that has the highest quality, reliability, cost effectiveness, and all these things that are important in the life cycle. So now you want to start being able to create a design or create analysis of a range of designs that start to meet and fulfill your value system metrics. And of course, there's the optimization phase of the alternatives. And you go through and you start now trying to figure out which group of alternatives would provide the best optimization and meet your goals with the highest level of performance. And then, of course, there's the decision-making process. And that's where you need to be able to bring the teams together within a formal logic process, rate, rank, and make a decision. And then once that design decision is made, then move on to the next phase. And then, of course, planning for action to implement the next phase. So these are the types of processes you go through in each phase of the system design process. Fairly well defined, but again, lower level techniques in systems science or systems engineering can apply in each one of these phases, and also can apply or be related to these types of logic. And these types of logic, I think, are very important in making sure you have a coherent, successful type of project. All right, so
can I so on that, I think so where people need the most support is in getting through that systematically and appropriately moving from no definition to well-defined, and without just choosing the wrong definition because it is well-defined, and especially when you're working with the groups. So I think that's as we've talked about over the years, getting from the most informal, least context, through the mid-range of increasing formalization and group learning, as Mary pointed out a while ago, the learning process where you develop the shared context, and you gradually converge on something that's well defined. This is what they call the fuzzy front end, I guess. But then other people have said that's misleading because it really should go on throughout the whole process. It's not just the front end, but this is what was problematic in the way the current INCOSI strategic plan is trying to proceed. Is it's not really clear if they have a well-defined problem. They seem to have they have a variety of problems. How well defined they are is an open question. Are these really problems, or are they outcomes or solution elements? Anyway, I don't know if this is all spelled out. I know we have a copy of this book. I don't have it in front of me. Unfortunately, as Helene pointed out, it was $600 on Amazon to get a copy of this now, apparently. But so I don't know the extent to which Hall deals with this, the fuzzy part of defining and learning, and not over not locking onto something because you can't define it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And the definition and the basically of the problem itself, and having the group itself come to realization and acceptance of that definition, or either change it to where that they accept it, is very important. And I think that's one of the things, very large scale problems where no one individual can see all aspects of the problem. That's where Warfield's work and the work Kostrakis and the people in Cyprus are doing. Those types of techniques help people discover the larger scale that no one individual can see. So those are extremely important.
That's right. Yeah, I think, and as the older I get, the more I ponder these issues, the more I recognize the key importance of that because of the cognitive limitations, and because you want to achieve a group understanding, the mechanics of what Warfield tried to tackle, it is so key. It doesn't help to have a very refined vision by yourself if you can't communicate it, and you probably don't have a very refined vision because it's going to there are going to be aspects of it that will be counterintuitive, that you won't understand until you externalize your assumptions into something automated, as you've been pointing out, until you get the computer-aided modeling.
There's a number of issues. One of my favorite examples, of course, was we had a system that was a land vehicle. Let's put it that way, and it needed to have a number of a very wide range of sensors on that vehicle. And so obviously, these sensors were available kind of like off the shelf in certain technology packages. But we were designing the vehicle, and we were designing um, all of the internal communications and network systems and everything. So the vehicle was up for design, the network systems and the comms were all up for design, but the actual sensor packages themselves, if you wanted to, you could just go buy those off the shelf. Primary problem with this was that the things that you were buying off the shelf were older technology, and they were all optics that were physical optics. There were physical lenses, there were, physical components, and these physical components, just due to physics, then made them susceptible to a wide range of environmental impacts, vibration, heat, so on and so forth. And so everybody, on that team, we had the sensor package guys, we had the comm guys, we had the vehicle guys. They were all working with their own technical budgets. They were all working with their own margin budgets. And the sensor guy said, oh, okay, I got this stuff. There's no risk, no production risk. There's no nothing, because I can just go get these. But I do have a little bit of margin risk and vibration. So they just took all of the margin and put it on their system, and then their job was done, right? And they wouldn't really listen to anybody else, right? And so it took a long period of time then for the network guys and the vehicle guys to slowly develop and design their system to a point where you can say, oh, okay, look, if you do that, it's going to cost us X tens of millions of dollars more to package up what you're giving us than it would be if we designed new software systems that basically don't have, are not susceptible to vibration and yada, yada, yada. And so those are the types of real life, scenarios that I've seen in teams where all of this idea of breaking down the requirements and giving very specific types of direction and so forth is really good, but one value package of one team, it was like the sensor guys, if I pick this and I have really low risk and I really don't have anything to worry about in my program is basically done and risk-free, and I just need to ride this out. And so, and those are the things where I've seen conflicts before. Whereas, the idea of putting together a strategic plan for, I'm not quite sure, for an organization, that seems to me to be like much more goal oriented. And you could do it using, if I was doing a strategic plan that wanted to achieve some objectives, it might be very straightforward to put it together in a systems methodology framework. But I really wouldn't put an organizational strategic plan in the context of a systems engineering, type of management plan. Those are, to my mind, are quite different.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, the problem solving. Well, let's see. The assumption that we're starting with, that Gary is starting with at least, is that there needs to be a discipline of system science, and he thinks that one can take that on as an objective and say, how do we achieve that objective? But if one were taking more Jack Ring's approach, and not, to some extent, he's imposing a design requirement there, saying that there needs to be this this structure, but he hasn't really said what needs it is supposed to fulfill, or what value it is supposed to provide in what context. Anyway, so this is it's a side. That's one example. I guess the fact of the complexities that can arise even in a physical system is, you're giving a good example. Then in the work that they do, the Cypress type work is, anyway, obviously the being able to see the big picture in the Warfield type approach is just, it might be, the most important point of system science is that, and Forrester made this point too, that you cannot intuit, what was it, similar to Warfield's point about if you have 3 or more elements interacting, you cannot intuit.
Right. The behavior. It's right.
Yeah.
Well, so these types of, the systems methodology, Metasystems methodology, I think is kind of an intermediate framework between science and engineering. And one of the things that Hall provides in this book is the scientific method compared to the systems methodology. How are they the same, and how are they different? And to me, it's really interesting because it says that the motivation for the scientific method is usually a personal need and a social need sometimes. But a systems methodology is a social need and it's goal-oriented. And the nature of the goal for the scientific method is knowledge for its own sake, and it's irrespective of efficiency. It doesn't really matter if what you're doing is efficient or not. You're just exploring for new knowledge. Systems methodology, it's the wise use of knowledge, and efficiency is very important. The efficient use of resources. Then goes on to list it so that the tasks and functions of the scientific method are theory construction, algorithms, descriptions, explanations, and predictions from your hypothesis and your observations. Whereas the task of systems methodology is the creation and use of open multi-goal seeking entities. So basically systems methodology here, he's putting directly into the design and creation camp of create and use open multi-goal seeking systems. And the types of truth basically goes through and talks about, well, scientific method is focused on formal and factual truths, where systems methodology is focused on formal, factual, and value truth. It goes through and talks about what are the differences between these. So I think that's really important, and maybe I'll expand that later on and talk about those in a little bit more detail. But it is, these are the things I think when I'm reading a lot of the material and especially with things like the simpler problem-solving processes that people have been talking about recently, it seems to, these ideas seem to fall through the cracks. And you can apply many of these simpler, like the OODA loop and things like that, you can apply them to everything in systems methodology. The systems methodology basically is put together in a way that it has a structure and it needs to be, addressed in the logic of the system that's set up. Okay, let's see. So, Kevin, do you have anything that you'd like to say about this so far? All right. So we've talked about the overview and the definitions, and now we'll talk a little bit about the basic precepts, concepts, and percepts of the systems methodology. And then this area basically all goes and starts to define some of these terms a little more formally. It defines a system is a set of objects, elements, or parts with relations between them and between their attributes, properties, or qualities. It's embedded in an environment containing other interrelated objects. And so this specific definition is, Mary and I modified a little bit, that the system is a relationship mapped over a set of objects. We didn't really talk too much about the attributes or properties of the objects. Didn't take it to that level, but essentially what by just focusing on the relationship between the objects allows us then to make a direct mapping to matrix mathematics. And then that then allows the matrix mathematics piece allows us to start mapping the isomorphic components between math, prose, and structured graphics. And for a given system, Hall goes on, the environment is a set of all objects outside the system. A change in those attributes affects or is affected by the behavior of the system. So besides defining a system, he also defines an environment, and that's everything outside of the system that affects the system. These are important ideas, but again, you can model the environment as a system itself. In the particular case of a system, a process or an activity where you're going to produce an industrial system, Marr came up with the idea that you have a product system, that's what you're building. You have the production system or produces the product system, and then you have the environment system, which is everything that's where the system's operated and impacts the production. So you really have this three system type of basis to look at. And so these things all kind of interrelate, and they make sense when you're talking about designing, producing, deploying, and operating a system. They make a little bit less sense when you're talking about discovering a system. So, okay. And then it goes on to define the objects and the attributes and the relations. And then once you've defined those a little bit more, then he takes and basically combines the idea of all the systems and its environment into the universe, basically, or saying this is everything there is, the total universe of action of the system is a combination of the environment and the system itself. Right. Well, is there any? Oh yeah, and basically, Hall in the precepts, concepts, and percepts points out on Figure 2.2 a verbal matrix and tree models of the value system. Now here he's starting to show ways of modeling a hierarchy and show ways of encoding the objectives or the value systems into matrices, that subordination matrix, which are looked to be almost, see the binary subordination matrix. I don't know if he, oh yeah, okay. Here he references all of Warfield's work in the Metasystems methodology here. So it makes a direct connection between the matrix implementations and the relationships within the systems that he's talking about. Makes a very good connection there. Is this, I wish the book was a little bit more available, because I think it provides a excellent foundation and framework which we could use to talk about many of these more specific concepts, and pull examples out of this book and use those to kind of guide discussion, so we wouldn't have to spend time each time developing a new context.
Is Arthur Hall still living, or is he passed now? Do you know?
Well, I could ask the internet.
I might have known. With reference, though, to something that Janet mentioned earlier, and that is the way to find a common understanding amongst participants of what exactly we're doing here, why we're talking about this, and more to the point, what is the value structure that we're going to be abiding by when we start resolving or answering the kinds of things that we'd like to address. To me, that's what's missing in the things, at least that I've read, that are coming out of both NCOSE and the ISSS literature.
Interesting. Arthur passed away in 2006. So, well, Mary, what would be something that that you would think that would be positive? I mean, something that's coming out of the literature. I didn't quite understand that.
Well, it's not so much what's coming out of the literature as the things that I have read that have come out of both the workshop materials, the international workshop out of NCOSE, and as well as some of the writings that were distributed that Gary was working on. And I frankly, and probably because I'm not actively involved with it, was simply confused, first of all, by even what the question was. In other words, what problem and or what set of concerns are the various people looking at? How have they framed them, or have they framed them? Have they come to any kind of consensus about what it is they're trying to resolve or discuss? To me, that's still an open question in both instances.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
I think part of the problem is that because the Hall Warfield work, maybe let me know if you think that's appropriate, because Warfield took so much from Hall and built on it. Or maybe both, it went both ways, I'm not sure. But I think this really laid a lot of these issues to rest. There should not be, there shouldn't be continual rediscovery of this basic, general structure, and including the graphics that you were showing there about, simple and complex problems, and use of models, and going from open issues to closed issues. It's a shame that it isn't standardized and freely available. These books are very expensive. Warfield's work is not easily available. either. If this was agreed upon that this part is the core, then people could address the thornier questions of how do you even get to the point of identifying values and goals and objectives, and you know, I guess what I've brought up before with the work that you two are doing, that going from informal natural language to logical propositions is itself a very interesting topic that should be, more effort should be focused there. More effort should be focused sort of outside of this core, which should be accepted as a standard model. I think because the people in NCOSI, certainly in ISSS and even in NCOSI don't have this as a standard model, they tend to they don't approach it systematically. They fear that being systematic will somehow box them in, I think. So this is my impression, and I don't want to and I know this is very hard, so I don't want to insult them or criticize them, but I think there's a fear that I know, I've suffered from too, but that if you commit to something, then you're going to be cutting off possibilities to be creative. So that gets in the way of being systematic. I guess that's also a general problem that your work faces in getting people to understand the value of using computer-supported modeling, is that people feel, oh, let's stay loosey-goosey and not, they don't see the that you can use systematic structured techniques and still be creative and open. Anyway, sort of rambling around on what you just said, but appreciate the point.
So let's see, the next time, does anybody want to have a topic for the 21st of March?
It would be great. I don't know how we can get more of Hal's work out so that we can actually look at it, given that it's so difficult to get the book. Helene was very interested as well. Maybe Helene would have a topic for the mid-month session. And so I don't know if that would take off on Hall, or maybe take off on yeah, I don't have any particular ideas. I have a feeling that Helene will want to join if she can.
Okay. Anyone else? I'm not quite sure that I'd like to schedule something without, the person, without someone to lead that discussion. So looks like April the 4th is the next one. And we'll see how that, we'll have April 4th. I think we could continue this discussion in a little bit more detail. If there are any particular areas that people would like to go into more detail on, or maybe we could have that discussion online.
Joe,
Yes.
something we could do in a couple of weeks is to go through the type of dialogue we would have to come up with the triggering questions for the type of thing that Gary was attempting to do.
Okay.
And
yeah, that would be great. Great.
And I could just, do it the way we go about other projects. I mean, the thing both about Gary's approach as well as what you were presenting in with Hall is it starts with the predefined set of categories of areas of concern, and then you fit your whatever thing you're modeling into those categories, and then the the other, it's not a it's a so that's different than a constructivist approach, which is trying to discover what the categories of concern are from the people.
All right.
That, you know,
That sounds
and-
good, Kevin. Would you like to lead that on the 21st?
yeah, sure.
Excellent. I'll put you down for that. And then Mary and I will have something for April 4th.
Okay.
And with that, I think we'll end the broadcast for today, and everyone have a excellent rest of March. Stay safe out there.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.